Brian at the RTA. I am very sorry about the issues that we encountered earlier. We had a technical problem with trying to set up the meeting from a different location. So we're ready to go now, and I'll try to get through this a little bit more quickly to leave some time at the end for questions. So this is the informational webinar for the Access to Transit program. We have a call for projects every other year for this, and I'm going to go over some background information about the program and talk about how to apply. So there will be time at the end for questions, which I'm asking you to submit in the chat box, just for the sake of not having everyone's microphone on and potentially having a distraction. So let's get right in here. Okay, so the RTA began Access to Transit back in 2012 with a group of 4 pilot projects. This program was created to help address the lack of a funding source for implementing TOD plan recommendations, particularly those related to multimodal access to transit. Providing facilities for pedestrians and cyclists is a key goal for nearly all of the transit-oriented planning projects we work on. And in addition to supporting transit ridership and TOD, these kinds of small-scale capital projects can provide a number of other benefits, such as safer streets, less congestion, lower demand for parking, and better first and last mile connections for transit riders. Through 3 complete phases of the program, Access to Transit has secured funding for 22 projects in communities around the RTA service area for a total of roughly $10 million invested in infrastructure improvements. Several projects have already been completed in the communities of Evanston, Glen Ellen, Mount Prospect, Palos Heights, and Rolling Meadows. We hold a call for projects every other year in advance of the CMAQ program call for projects, and I'll discuss that relationship in more detail shortly here. This year's call for projects opened on April 16th and will close on August 31st. We offer a generous window of time for potential applicants, so they have a chance to consider feasible projects and put together the information that's required for the application. The call for projects is open to all current and past participants in the RTA's community planning program and CMAP's local technical assistance program. And this year we added communities that are participating in the RTA's interagency signage program. Applications must come from either a municipality or a county government. Communities that have partnered in multi-jurisdictional planning projects like corridor plans are also eligible to apply. And we ask that projects be directly related to improving access to a specific CTA, Metra, or PACE service. So the applicant must be within walking distance of transit, and the project should be relevant to a plan that's completed or underway. So it's not necessary that the project be literally spelled out in a plan, but the applicants should show that there's a logical connection between the plan and the project. Okay, eligible improvements. Projects might include one or more of the following types of improvements. There's bus and rail warming shelters, crosswalks, pedestrian signal heads, sidewalks, covered bike parking at transit stations, wayfinding signage, and ADA accessibility improvements. Because of our reliance on CMAQ funding, this program prioritizes new facilities over replacement facilities. So in the example of sidewalks, applicants shouldn't propose to replace existing sidewalks because they've got some wear and tear, or say, there's some heaving and they're uneven or something like that. The priority is on new facilities, and the exception to this is if the existing facilities are so bad that they basically qualify as being unusable. We'll also consider other types of facilities that aren't specifically called out here. If the applicant can make a logical case for the need for a certain type of improvement that's going to provide better transit access. But in that case, I'd recommend that you contact me first if you have a proposal like that, so we can talk it out prior to submitting your application. Okay, this program is designed to leverage RTA and local funds to apply for federal CMAQ funds. If you're not familiar, CMAQ stands for Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, and it's a large federal program that provides funding for transit, pedestrian, and bicycle facilities, among other things. In our region, the program is administered by CMAP, and projects are selected by the CMAQ Selection Committee, which works in cooperation with CMAP staff. The RTA holds the Access to Transit call for projects every other year, several months ahead of the CMAQ call for projects. We then select a number of projects to move ahead in the funding process, which will combine into a single CMAQ application for that deadline, which will likely be in early 2019. So funding for Access to Transit projects is contingent on our application being accepted to the CMAQ program, and that will be finalized in the fall of 2019. Although we've had past success at obtaining CMAQ funding for the program, it's important to keep in mind that our CMAQ application will be one among many, as it's a competitive program. As far as eligible budgets, projects must have a budget that's between $150,000 and $1 million. And as you may know, CMAQ is an 80-20 split program. To assist with the 20% local match requirement, the RTA will contribute half of that amount for most communities that apply. However, in the case of communities with proven financial hardship, the RTA will contribute the entire 20% local match. Eligibility for community qualifying for financial hardship is determined by the local match guidelines that CMAP uses. And if you're unsure whether the community you're representing qualifies for this, you can feel free to call or email me to find out, and I can offer you the details on that. So phase one engineering. This is a question a topic that comes up pretty frequently in these projects. So applicants that we select to Access to Transit are asked to initiate phase one engineering upon notification from the RTA that we're selecting your project. This is necessary because phase one engineering has to be initiated prior to applying to the CMAQ program. Unfortunately, Access to Transit does not provide funding for phase one engineering at this time, so it is the responsibility of the project sponsor to fund phase one if it's not already complete. Additionally, I should explain, phase one is required for practically all of these types of projects to be eligible for CMAQ funding. So even if improvements are being proposed on a local roadway that's not under IDOT jurisdiction, you are still required to follow IDOT's engineering approval process because CMAQ funds flow through that agency. So for all roadway improvements, you have to follow that IDOT process. It's a different process if it's a direct improvement to a transit station. That is in that case, the funds come through FTA, and that's a different process. So how to apply to the program. On our Access to Transit webpage on the RTA website, we have a program application form available. It has several questions that you'll need to fill out that are related to your eligibility and a description of the project and how it's going to improve access to transit. The form also has a list of attachments that you'll need to include. One of them is a statement of community support that should come from your mayor, village board of trustees, or other applicable local leaders. It should also include a detailed estimate of costs for your project, which will likely require consultation with an engineer. The estimated budget should address design engineering and construction costs unless you're only requesting funding for construction, which some projects have done in the past. But typically, because design engineering and construction are both covered under CMAQ, the majority of the applicants that we get are requesting funding for both. We also ask that you include a concept plan or other exhibit that shows the location and the type of the proposed improvements. Projects don't need to be contiguous, and they can be focused in several different locations as long as they meet the overall eligibility requirements and there's a nearby transit service that they're benefiting. We also ask that you include some data for the project area that's going to help us fill out the CMAQ application. This includes zoning requirements, population and employment densities, and transit ridership data. So next is the program timeline. This is available on our website, but I figured I would just go over it briefly here to give you an idea how the application selection and then CMAQ application process will work. So we're in May here. Call for projects opened a couple weeks ago. It's going to close on August 31st. That's the deadline for application. So once we receive applications in September and October, we'll review them internally and make a selection and notify all applicants of whether we're going to move ahead with your project or not. And for those applicants that have been selected, that's the time when we ask you to initiate Phase 1 engineering if it's not already complete. And this timeline for the CMAQ program, it hasn't been released yet, to my knowledge. So this is just going on past years. So there may be some, wiggle room here once it comes out, but this is a pretty good estimate for what to expect here. So in January, we expect they'll release the CMAQ call for projects. In January and February, we'll be working on preparing the CMAQ application for the projects that we've selected to access to transit. In March was the deadline last year for CMAQ, so going on that, we'll submit a CMAQ application for all of the projects that we've selected for access to transit. And in mid to late summer, usually there's a list of recommended CMAQ projects released for public comment by CMAP, and then that list is typically finalized around October, so sometime in the middle of the fall there. The next steps after that, in January of 2020, CMAP will transfer the project sponsorship to the applicants, and the RTA will start working with those communities to set up intergovernmental agreements. And in February of 2020, we expect that you'll be able to begin work on the projects. So whether that's design engineering or going into the queue for construction. So for applicants whose projects are selected for funding, if it's chosen to access to transit, then awarded CMAQ funds, ownership of the project is transferred to the sponsor community, who's expected to manage it to completion according to the standards that are set forth by CMAP, who, like I mentioned, administers the CMAQ program. And they have they'll distribute information to all the applicants who are receiving CMAQ funding. So you'll be aware of what their process is, and you can also contact me or the RTA, all the RTA planning staff about what the requirements are, at that time. Sponsor communities are also going to need to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the RTA, and the reason that we do this is to confirm the funding obligations and the project management expectations. I request status updates from the sponsor communities on a quarterly basis, and I'm available to offer assistance with questions and issues that may arise in the course of, engineering and construction processes. But I should mention that the RTA doesn't have the staff resources to oversee the engineering and construction processes. So, the bulk of that falls on the responsibility of the project sponsor. To receive funds from the RTA, the project sponsors need to front the local share, local match of the project costs, I should say, and then you can invoice the RTA for reimbursement. This can be done either in increments over the course of the project or all at the end. So whatever is the preference of the project sponsor. We just ask that you have to pay for it up front and then provide us with documentation as proof that the work was completed. So now that we've gone over most of the major points of the program, I want to talk a little bit about how to choose a project. Do this acknowledging that some of the applicants that are out there may have projects that are already set to go. You may have applied for, engineering funding previously. So, I'm not trying to assume anything, but for those of you out there who aren't sure, who are thinking about it, this would be some helpful guidance, things to consider. And this also will discuss the criteria that we use when we're selecting projects. So to go back to a point I previously discussed under eligibility, I suggest you review recommendations from relevant planning documents. These are often grounded in community feedback and data, so they're a good source for project ideas. Another thing that's very important to consider is the project's ability to positively affect transit ridership or replace automobile trips with walking or biking. In some of these cases, the project we may consider the project as scoring well because it's encouraging a number of people who, say, are driving their cars to the metro station to walk or to bike. So it's not just increasing transit ridership. We're also considering the project's ability to reduce vehicle miles traveled. So these criteria are important to the CMAQ scoring, and for that reason, we heavily consider them in our selection process. Projects that have the potential to improve high ridership transit services or impact areas with high population or employment densities are also favorable. You should also consider the readiness and the feasibility of the project. Some applicants may have projects that have already completed phase 1 engineering and are waiting to move into the design stage, or have projects that have been discussed at length with the community, but you're looking for a funding source. These are also favorable because they've already been vetted to a certain extent through, community feedback and, engineering work. So finally, we ask that if your project is directly related to a transit facility, like say a warming shelter, a bus or rail station, transit station bike parking, or any improvements that directly touch transit facilities, I highly encourage you to discuss your application with the service boards prior to submitting it. They may have certain design requirements, or they may already have overlapping plans in place. So to save you time in the long run and possibly help your chances of being selected, I highly recommend that you coordinate with them prior to applying. And if you have local representatives that you usually work with at the service boards, I recommend you reach out to them first. But you can also contact me, and I can put you in touch with contacts at CTA, Metra, and PACE. But this is a really important detail because we want to make sure that, in these efforts to improve access to transit, that it is, in coordination with the service boards and their operations. So we don't want to run into a conflict down the road. So it'll just save a lot of, a lot of time on the back end if you were to run into one of these conflicts by reaching out to them first. Okay, I'd like to discuss some previously approved access to transit projects to give you an idea of what we funded in the past. This first example is on the Gulf Road Corridor in Rolling Meadows. This project came out of recommendations in the Gulf Road Corridor Plan that was completed through our community planning program several years back. And this corridor is a stretch of roughly 2 miles. It has a dense concentration of employers and several office campuses, and it has service from 3 PACE fixed routes. But prior to this project, it wasn't a very walkable or transit-friendly area, which was a big part of the motivation for Rolling Meadows to do the plan. And you can see here in this older aerial photo of one of the intersections with an office park drive, what conditions were like previously on the corridor. So there's no crosswalks here, but you've got a PACE bus route on the southeast quadrant. There are a PACE bus stop on the southeast quadrant there, but practically no way to get to it. And I don't think anybody sees this and considers it a pedestrian-friendly environment here. So to go to our next slide. This is an aerial after the project was complete. And the project covered a much broader area than this, but I'm just focusing on this one intersection to just show some of the, give an example of the types of improvements that have been done in the past. Rolling Meadows received $1.2 million for this project. They added over 1 mile of sidewalks, 5 new crosswalks, and pedestrian signal heads at 2 locations. And as you can see in this aerial photo of the intersection, the pedestrian facilities are greatly improved. It's much safer and accommodating for pace riders to get to and from the office developments that are just north of Gulf Road. So on the drive at the top of the photo there leads to a office development. Okay, the next example is in Mount Prospect. This is at a much smaller scale than the previous project, but I think it does a good job of showing the kind of practical improvements that you can target with these grants. In the second phase of the program, the Village of Mount Prospect received about $170,000 to add 60 new bike parking spaces at 3 different locations around their transit station, or around their metro station, which is also served by 2 pace fixed routes. So here's the after photo. You can see that little strip of parkway there was converted into a nice bike parking shelter, solar powered. It's got lighting for people who are arriving back to the station after dark. This, along with 2 other locations around the station, are where were basically spots where bike parking was added into unused spaces. Like it may have been like the parkway here, or part of like a landscape island or something like that. As you can see here, this photo was from November when it was already starting to get cool and people are already using the bike parking spaces. And we've heard from the village that it's been a popular project. And this was tied to Mount Prospect's TOD plan, which is another community planning program project that we finished a few years back. Finally, this is an example from Bensonville. This hasn't been constructed yet. It's actually scheduled for construction this summer, but I still wanted to include it as a more recently approved project. The village proposed to make improvements to their metro parking lot that's immediately to the south of the station to make it more accommodating for bike, pedestrian, and transit access. The next slide here, you can see the proposed concept plan. The previously sort of unstructured parking lot that was there has been reconfigured to add a PACE bus facility that's got some layover space. It's more pedestrian friendly here. There's going to be some bike parking added, and it just makes the access to the station for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users much more friendly and accommodating. This project has a budget of $500,000, and it came out of recommendations in the TOD plan that was completed through the community planning program. Okay, we're at the end here. So again, apologize for the previous drama with the webinar. But I'm happy to take any questions that you might have if you want to enter them into the chat box. It should be at the right-hand corner of the screen. So we've already got one here. So this is from Cody for Phase 1 engineering. Do municipalities need to receive design approval prior to submitting to CMAQ, or was there a different definition? No, you don't need to. At least in the last round of the last CMAQ application that we submitted, a Phase 1 approval was not required. The requirement was that Phase 1 be initiated with IDOT by the time the application was submitted. However, we do ask the communities whose projects we've selected to begin it as soon as possible. So in case any issues arise or IDOT has any more intensive review requirements due to the location or the circumstances. So yeah, that's about all I have to say on that. Of course, just keep in mind too, this could change as well, but that should be a good guideline. Can we get a copy of the slide presentation? Yeah, I'm going to post the video. We're recording this webinar. I'm going to post it onto the Access to Transit webpage as soon as possible. And there will also be a PDF copy of the slide presentation available as well. We got another question here. Will all projects receive RTA participation at 50% of the local match? So as I covered previously, the majority of the projects will qualify for 50% local match contribution from the RTA. You know, there's a group of maybe let's say 25 communities that would qualify for the coverage of the entire local match. And like I mentioned earlier, we use CMAP's local match guidelines to determine which communities will qualify. And it's not a very large group. And honestly, maybe even less than 25, because I'm not sure that all of the group that I was looking at on CMAP spreadsheet all has transit service. So, and like I said, if you're wondering about that, you think that the community that you're applying for may qualify, you can give me a call, send me an email, and I'll let you know. Let's see, we've got another question here. Can a project be a new project? Does it have to be recommended by other sources like a bike ped plan or committee or a planning document or other source? You know, like I mentioned previously, we do want projects to be relevant to a plan that was done. However, we don't ask that the plan be literally recommend, or the project be literally recommended in the plan. You know, if you've got something in place, even if it's a comprehensive plan, but there's a chapter in it, say, on improving, improving your pedestrian network around your existing transit services. We just want to have some kind of, a plan with, public outreach and have that sort of public feedback involved at some point, and not just have projects that, don't have that background work put into it. Let's see here. What was the project cost for the Mount Prospect bike shelters? So the total budget on that was roughly $170,000. So we added that minimum budget requirement this year for the program. The reason that we did that is because we had some projects in the past that were pretty low for the budget, and it's not that we want to discourage that, but there's a certain amount of administrative burden involved with these projects because you're going through the IDOT process, and just the general increased complexity that's involved with receiving federal funds as opposed to something that would come out of a municipality's general revenues. So we set that $150,000 floor, thinking that this will still allow communities to come to us with projects like those bike parking projects, because we looked at the budgets that were on some of the bike parking projects that we've done in the past, and it seemed like most of them were above that, either at or above that $150,000 threshold. So if something's coming in right around that mark and you're somewhat shy, maybe we could discuss it, but you definitely want to shoot for the budget range that we've laid out. Does bike share system or streetscape improvements at or near transit stations qualify for this type of funding? The bike share question is an interesting one. That's not really something that we've considered before, although it certainly is a good strategy for better access to transit. That's something that I want to think more about, and also take a look at its eligibility with CMAQ. Yeah, I want to think more about that before giving a straight answer here. But as far as streetscape improvements, that's a good issue to raise, and probably something I should have covered in the presentation, to be honest, because CMAQ does not provide funding for streetscaping projects. We have had projects where landscaping is involved as an add-on to, say, a sidewalk project or something like this. But generally speaking, streetscaping is more the realm of ITEP, if you're familiar with that program. So I would recommend that. We got another comment. Thank you for the excellent summary of the program. Well, thank you for the compliment, and you're welcome. If there's anyone else who has questions, please feel free to enter it. Let's see. Okay, we got another one here. Would a project that is beginning this summer but is expected to take a couple years to complete be eligible for funding? No. Unless maybe it's a project that's divided up into sections. So you're finishing like a first phase, and then you're looking to add on to it. Like I called out in the timeline, these projects wouldn't really be getting going, considering that we get, assuming we get CMAQ funding for them, they wouldn't really be getting off the ground until early 2020. So, I know it's not ideal for communities who are looking to aggressively pursue projects. If you got something that you really want to get started on, this may not be the best scenario for that type of thing, because you've got to, like I mentioned before, you got to apply to us. We're going to take some time to select projects. We have to put together a CMAQ application. The CMAQ program, there's about a 6 or month more window between the time that applications are due and when they make the decision on which projects will be funded. So you're looking at a pretty long time frame before you can even get rolling on these. Okay. Just take a minute here to see if anyone else has any further questions. But it seems like gotten through the question list here. You can see here my contact info is right there. Like I mentioned previously, you got the August 31st deadline. There's plenty of time to reach out to me to discuss applications. I try to maintain a certain level of neutrality and not coach anyone too much, but I certainly want to make myself as available as possible to answer any questions that you might have and offer any kind of guidance about, like what we're looking for, for projects, ideal projects for this program and things like that. So don't be shy about that. And, here we go. We got another question here. So what if the transit service is not in place but is coming online this year? Can Ped Bike Transit Access still apply now, given the connected transit service will be operational by the time the connections are built? Yeah, so I just discussed the time frame and the amount of time that you're looking at before these projects would get going. So I think that we would want to have confirmation from the relevant service board that the service is going to be coming online. But I think that that would be a good idea, for an application. Generally speaking, as long as you can show that yes, we expect the say like the Pace's Milwaukee Pulse line. We all know that that's coming likely towards the end of this year. So yeah, if there's things like that that are planned and they're sure bets that they're going to be coming online, then we would definitely consider an application to improve the access to that service. I'll just give a few more minutes here, see if anybody else has any more questions. I don't want to be rude, cut anyone off if they're furiously typing, but you can also feel free to leave the webinar if you like, because I'm at the end of the presentation here. So yeah, please check back on the RTA Access to Transit webpage. Okay, they're trickling in here. Will we be notified when the presentation PDF is posted on the RTA's website? Yeah, I will. I'll send out an email to the entire group here. So glad we managed to successfully do this, because things were a little chaotic earlier. Again, apologize for that and any confusion that it may have caused. So managed to drag ourselves back from the brink of disaster here. So, okay, well, I'm going to end the webinar now. You've got my contact information. If you want to follow up with me with any further questions, please feel free. And, you know, look forward to seeing all your applications later this summer. So best of luck, and everyone have a good day. Thank you.